Two paths lay before them. One, a forgotten footnote in a dusty warehouse. The other, a blinding dawn that forever changed the world.
The bats! They're on fire! Get water on that fuel dump! We're gonna blow! They're loose! Take cover now! The fuel depot is hit! We have to evacuate! It's completely out of control.
What if I told you that before the atomic bomb, the United States nearly burned Japan to the ground using bats? In 1943, a Pennsylvania dentist convinced President Franklin D. Roosevelt to approve one of the strangest weapons ever imagined, Project X-ray. The plan strapped tiny incendiary bombs to billions of bats and release them over Japanese cities. It sounds insane until it actually worked. Test fire spread uncontrollably. An entire US airfield was accidentally set ablaze, and for a moment this bizarre idea looked like it could end the war. So why was it suddenly cancelled? And what replaced it that was even more devastating? This is the unbelievable true story of the bat bomb that almost changed World War II. May 15, 1943, Carlsbad, New Mexico. Dawn hasn't fully broken yet. A dry desert wind drags across the runway of the Auxiliary Army airfield. Mechanics sip burnt coffee. A few soldiers laugh quietly beside a truck loaded with strange metal canisters. Nothing about this morning feels unusual until the sky begins to move. At first, it looks like smoke, then it shifts. A dark cloud, low and alive, ripples above the base. Thousands of tiny shapes twist together, circling, driving, rising again. You can almost hear it before you truly register what you are seeing. A high-pitched, chaotic chittering that grows louder by the second. Then the first one hits the ground, a small body, wings twitching, and strapped to its chest, a tiny device, a shoulder freezes. When the hell is that? No one answers because suddenly everywhere those creatures are landing. One roof, on few drums, under wooden eaves, and then a spark, just one, then another. Within seconds, flames begin crawling across the base like something alive. Barracks ignite, a hangar erupts, a fuel line bursts into a roaring inferno. Men start shouting, running, grabbing houses that feel useless against what's unfolding. This isn't an incident, this is a test, and it's already out of control. You are watching one of the strangest and most dangerous ideas of World War II come to life. An idea born not in a lab but in the mind of a dentist. The story doesn't begin here, though. It begins months earlier, far from the desert, far from the chaos. It begins with a man who should never have been anywhere near a weapons program. His name was Lytle Adams, a civilian, a dreamer, and by all reasonable standards, completely unqualified to change the course of warfare. But war has a way of bending reality, especially after December 17, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor didn't just shock America, it ignited it. Factories roared to life, scientists raced against time, military planners scrambled for ideas, any ideas that could strike back at an enemy thousands of miles away. Japan felt distant, untouchable, and more importantly, difficult to bomb. Why? Because Japanese cities at the time were built largely from wood and paper. Tight, dense, and dangerously flammable, but also hard to hit with precision using the technology of the early 1940s. Traditional bombing runs struggled, accuracy was poor, damage was inconsistent. What the US needed wasn't just more bombs, it needed a way to start fires that couldn't be stopped, and somehow that idea found its way to a dentist in Pennsylvania. Lytle Adams wasn't sitting in a war room when inspiration struck him. He was on vacation exploring caves in New Mexico, Carlsbad caverns to be exact, and inside those caves he saw something unforgettable. Billions of bats, a living, breathing storms of wings. They poured out of the cave at dust like smoke, endless, coordinated, unstoppable. Adams didn't just see animals, he saw potential because bats could fly, they could hide, they could reach places bombs could not, and more importantly, they could carry something small, something deadly. It sounds abused, even now, it sounds absurd. But Adam didn't think so. In his mind, the idea was simple and terrifying effective. Attack small incendiary devices to bats, release them over Japanese cities at dawn. Let them roast naturally in rooftops, attics, and wooden structures, and then wait. When the timers triggered, thousands of fires would ignite simultaneously. Not one explosion, not one target, but an entire city catching fire from within. No warning, no defense, no escape. Adams knew he needed more than ignition to make this real. He needed access, he needed power, he needed someone who would actually listen, and against all odds, he found him. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States, a man already overseeing countless experimental wartime projects. Most proposals never reached his desk. Even few held his attention, but Adams had one advantage most inventors didn't. He knew Eleanor Roosevelt. That connection, thin as it was, opened a door, and once Adam stepped through it, there was no turning back. The proposal, landing in Washington like something out of a science fiction novel. Military officials raised eyebrows. Scientists scoffed. A weapon made of bats. It sounded ridiculous, but Roosevelt didn't laugh. He read, he thought, and then he said something that changed everything. This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but it's worth looking into. Just like that, the project was approved. You have to understand what this means. In the middle of a global war, with resources stretched thin, the United States government decided to invest time, money, and manpower into weaponizing bats. Not drones, not missile, bats. The project was given a code name, Project X-Ray, and soon it would grow into one of the most bizarre military experiments in history. But turning an idea into reality isn't simple. First, they needed bats, not just any bats. They needed the right species. Enter the Mexican free-tailed bat, small, fast, and incredibly abundant in the American Southwest. More importantly, they could carry up to 3 times their own body weight. That made them perfect candidates. Soon, teams were dispatched to capture them, thousands at a time, netting them as they poured out of caves, transporting them in crates, storm, then in controlled environments. The scale was staggering. By the end, they would plan to use millions, but capturing bats was the easy part. The real challenge, turning them into weapons. Scientists and engineers began designing miniature incidentally devices, tiny bombs, light enough for a bat to carry, powerful enough to ignite wood, equipped with timers that could delay ignition until the bat had settled into buildings. Every detail mattered. Too heavy, and the bat wouldn't fly. Too light, and it wouldn't cause enough damage. Too fast, and the bat would ignite mid-air. Too slow, and the opportunity would be lost. It was a delicate balance between biology and destruction. And then came the strangest part of all, training the bat. Would can't command a bat like a soldier. You can't give it orders, but you can influence it by understanding its instincts. Bats see dark, enclosed spaces, roof, attics, beams, so the plan was simple. Release them at dawn when they naturally search for shelter. Let instinct do the rest. No control, no guidance, just house guided by nature. Early tests began in controlled environments, a small release, careful observation, and to anyone's surprise, it worked. The bat flew, they disappeared. They hid exactly where expected, and when the timers triggered, fires erupted in all the right places, multiple points, simultaneously, unpredictable, unstoppable. The results were horrifying, effective. Wooden structure burned fast, fire spread rapidly. Containment became impossible. In simulation after simulation, entire model towns were reduced to ash, and military officials began to release something chilling. This might actually be better than conventional bombing, because instead of dropping a few large bombs, you could release thousands of tiny ones, each one starting its own fire, each one multiplying the destruction. The army took notice. Then the navy got involved, and with each new test, the project grew larger, more ambitious, more dangerous. But there was a problem, a big one, because what works in the theory doesn't always behave in reality, and that brings us back to the desert, to Carlsbad, to that morning when the sky turned alive and everything went wrong, because during one critical test, something slipped, something small, something almost insignificant. A container wasn't secured properly, and inside that container were armed bats. No one noticed at first, not until it was too late. The bat escaped, and they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They flew, they scattered, they hid. Only this time, the target wasn't a model town, it wasn't a test structure, it was a real military base, and within a minute, Carlsbad Auxiliary Army Airfield became an inferno. Fuel tanks exploded, buildings collapsed, equipment burned, all because of a weapon that had just proven one terrifying truth: it works too well. But if this accident hadn't happened, if Project X-Ray had continued without interruption, would these bats have been released over Japan? Would entire cities have burned before the atomic bomb was ever dropped? Or was something even more destructive already on the horizon? The flame at Carlsbad didn't die quickly. They spread, hungry, relentless. Fuel drums popped like gunshots. Canvas stands vanished in seconds. A truck loaded with supplies became a torch that lit up the desert dawn. Men scrambled with hoses, but the water pressure felt laughable against what they were facing, because this wasn't one fire, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, each one sparkled by something small, something alive just minutes ago. You can almost picture it, bats stuck into the wooden beams of a hangar roof, clinging upside down like they always do, until the timer burns down, and then ignition right above the structure, right where it hurts the most. But the time the fires were under control, the damage was undeniable. Building destroyed, equipment lost, embarrassment immeasurable, but buried beneath the frustration and anger was something else. Something far more dangerous. Proof Project X-ray hadn't failed. It had succeeded too well. Back in Washington, reports moved quickly. Photos, damage assessments, eyewitnesses' accounts. Some officers were curious. This was a disaster. Others leaned in closer because if a handful of escaped bats could cripple an American airfield, what could millions do to an enemy city built of wood and paper? The logic was chilling. Japan, like most Western nations, had cities densely packed with wooden homes, narrow streets, structures almost touching each other. Fire breaks were limited. Firefighting infrastructure stretched thin. A single live bomb might destroy a block, but hundreds of small fires ignition simultaneously. That was something else entirely. That was a firestorm. And firestorms were not just destructive, they were uncontrollable. Military planners began running simultaneously. The map cities Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe. They studied wind patterns, building destiny, seasonal humidity, and every time they ran the scenario, the result pointed to the same conclusion. If executed properly, Project X-ray could set entire urban area ablaze within a minute. But to do that, they needed scale. Not hundreds of beds, not thousands, billions. The logistics alone were staggering. Imagine it, crates stacked high with hibernating birds, cooled to keep them dormant, each one carefully fitted with a tiny incendiary device, each device armed with a precise timer, all loaded into a specially designed bomb casing. These weren't ordinary bombs, they were delivery systems, each casing packed with compartments like a honeycomb. Hundreds of bats inside, carried high above enemy territory, dropped at altitude, and then at a specific point in the descent, the crossing wouldn't open, parachutes would deploy, and the bats, waking as the airborne, would scatter into the sky. No explosions, no warning, just silence, followed by chaos. The timing had to be perfect, released too early, and the bats might scatter too widely, too late, and they might not find shelter before ignition. Every second mattered. Every variable had to be controlled, and yet control was always an illusion because bats are not machines. They are unpredictable, wild, guided by instinct, not orders. This uncertainty worried some officials. What if the bats didn't behave as expected? What if they flew in the wrong direction? What if weather conditions disrupted the plan? But the tests keep coming and the results keep reinforcing the same ideas. It worked. In Utah, a specially constructed test range, the military built a mock Japanese village, wooden houses, paper walls, tightly packed structures, everything designed to replicate real conditions. When the bats were released, observers watched closely. They saw the swarm scatter. They saw the animal disappear into rooftops, into eaves, into hidden spaces, and then they waited, seconds passed, then minutes, and suddenly smoke, thin at first, then thicker, then everywhere, multiple structures ignited at once. Flame spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within a short time, the entire mock village was burning, not from one source, but from many. Simultaneous ignition points made containment impossible. One observer reportedly said it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Not a bombing, not an explosion, but something more insidious. As if the buildings themselves had decided to burn. That was the power of Project X-ray. It didn't just destroy, it infiltrated the army air forces. Initially, skeptics began to take the project seriously, but with seriousness came responsibility and risks. because every new test meant handling thousands of live animals, each one carrying a weapon, each one capable of starting a fire in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Carlsbad had already proven what wrong places looked like. Despite the incident, the project didn't stop. In fact, and accelerated. The US Navy took control. They saw potential not just in destruction but in strategy. Imagine crippling enemy infrastructure before a ground invasion. Imagine city in chaos before the first soldier even landed. Imagine fire doing the work of bombs. Funding increased, teams expanded, more beds were captured, more devices were built, more tests were scheduled. By May 1944, Project X-ray was no longer a strange experiment, it was a serious contender, a weapon that might be deployed in the Pacific theater, but time was not on its side. War moved fast, and in the background, quite secret and far more powerful, another project was unfolding, one that didn't rely on animals or instincts or probability, a project that promised a single strike with unmatched destruction. While bats were being trained, scientists in Los Alamos were unlocking something else entirely, something that would change the nature of warfare forever. And slowly, almost quietly, Project X-ray began to lose its priority, not because it didn't work, but because something else might work better. Still, not everyone was ready to let it go, because the bad bomb had one advantage no other weapon could match. It was already proven, already tested, already terrifying. So the question remained, would the military deploy it before something else took its place, or would one of the strangest weapons ever convinced be overs head down before it ever saw real combat? And more importantly, what would have happened if it hadn't been? Summer 1944, somewhere deep in the desert of New Mexico, behind fences, guards, and silence, the bats are still here, crated, numbered, controlled. Technicians move carefully, almost delicately, as they handle the tiny incendiary device, each one no bigger than a matchbox, metal casing, chemical payloads, timer ticking with quiet precision. One paper, everything is ready, the weapon works, the delivery system is viable, the results are undeniable, and yet something has shifted. You can feel it in the way officers speak now, shorter conversation, longer pauses, eyes drifting towards reports that have nothing to do with bats, because somewhere else, far more secret, far more urgent, another idea is taking shape. And unlike Project X-ray, this one doesn't rely on chance. Los Alamos, a place that officially doesn't exist, no maps, no public acknowledgement, just a name passed quietly between those who are allowed to know. Inside, some of the brightest minds in the world are working on something that sounds even more impossible than weaponized bats. They are trying to split the atom while bats flutter in cage. Psychics calculated forces that could erase cities in a single flash, while technicians attached tiny fire started to living creatures. Scientists assembled equations that could unleash energy never seen before in human history. Two projects, two completely different paths to destruction, and only one will win the race. Back in the BAT program, progress continues because no one has officially pulled the plug, not yet. Engineers refine the bomb casing, they improve deployment systems, they test new ignition methods, every detail sharpened. optimized, because if this weapon is used, it has to work flawlessly. There will be no second chance. Military planners begin sketching real targets, not mock villages, not test structure, actual cities in Japan, Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka. The idea is chillingly simple. Launch a fleet of bombers, release bad bombs, consisters over urban sentries just before dawn. Let instinct take over, let the bad find shelter, and then let the fire begin. No sirens, no warning, just smoke rising from rooftop across the city. All at once, some officers believe it could end the war faster than conventional bombing. Others worried about unpredictability, because war, despite its brutality, it still depends on control, and Project X-Ray was chaos by design. There were also practical concerns: time, training, protection. To execute a full-scale attack, billions of beds will be required. The means: capturing them, housing them, feeding them, transporting them. An entire logistical chain built around living weapons. And then there was the weather. Temperature affected bed behavior, wind affected flight patterns, humidity affected ignition. Too many variables, too many unknowns. Compare that to what was being promised at Los Alamos: one bomb, one plane, one mission, no reliance on animals, no unpredictable behavior, no need for millions of moving parts, just a single device with the power to change everything. By late 1944, whispers began to circulate more openly. The atomic project, though still highly classified, was gained momentum. Funding flowed toward it, attention followed, priority shifted, and Project X-Ray started to fade, not because it failed, but because something else had captured the future. And still, for those who had worked on the bad bomb, it was hard to let go, because they had seen it works. They had watched entire test villages burn. They had witnessed Carlsbad turn into a residential inferno. They knew what this weapon could do. One internal report made a striking claim: given time, the bad bomb could potentially cause more widespread fires than conventional incendiary bombing, more entry points, more ignition sources, more chaos. And yet, time was exactly what they didn't have. The war in the Pacific was intensifying. American forces were island hopping closer to Japan. Casualties were rising. Pressure was building to end the war as quickly as possible. There was no room anymore for long-term experimentation. No patience for unconventional weapons that required months of preparation. The military needed something immediate, something decisive, something final. In early 1945, the decision came down quietly, without ceremony. Project X-Ray was officially cancelled. Years of work, thousands of tests, millions of dollars, all shelved. The bats would never fly over Japan. Instead, resources were redirected. Focus narrowed, attention looked onto a single goal: complete the atomic bomb. And just months later, that goal would be achieved. August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber flies over Hiroshima. But before that moment, before the flash, before the world changes forever, there's a question that lingers in the shadows of history. What if Project X-Ray had been completed first? What if billions of bats had been released over Japanese cities? What if fire, slow spreading, uncontrollable, had become the weapon that ended the war? Would it have been less destructive, or somehow worse? Because unlike a single explosion, the bad bombs wouldn't end in an instant. It would unfold minute by minute, fire by fire, street by street, A city wouldn't vanish, it would burn, and as strange as it sounds, as unbelievable as it feels, that further was closer to reality than most people will ever realize. A dentist idea, a swarm of bats, and a weapon that almost changed history, but in the end, it wasn't the strangest idea that won the war. It was the most powerful one. Still, somewhere in the ashes of abandoned plans and classified files, Project X remains a haunting reminder that something, and sometimes the line between genius and madness is only measured by timing, and history is shaped just as much by the weapons we never use as the ones we did. If this story changed the way you see warfare, then you have just uncovered one of the strangest hidden chapters of World War II, where innovation crossed into the unbelievable. From a dentist's wild imagination to a near deployed weapon under Project X-Ray, this story proves that history isn't just shaped by what happened, but also by what almost did. So here's the question: would the world have been different if the pet bomb had been used before the atomic age began? If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss powerful untold war stories like this one. Share this video with someone who loves history and drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more immersive World War II stories that feel like you are right there in the movement, stay tuned because the next story might be even more unbelievable.